Hey everybody, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and yesterday we were talking about Nehemiah, the master event planner, hosting this dedication of the walls in 444 BC in Jerusalem. And I don't think this thing was casually put together. I think he was brilliantly using imagery and music and ceremony to tell a grand story and to really communicate a lot of layers of meaning to the people who were there and to us who read about it after the fact. So yesterday we talked about one of those, which is, I think he was trying to tie this into the imagery surrounding the conquest of Jericho. And today we're going to talk about the other thing that I would think he was trying to evoke from the Old Testament with this thing. So I'll have Jeff play some music, and then we'll pick up where we left off. I don't think the Jericho thing is the only scene from Joshua that Nehemiah is hearkening back to with how he put together this event, rededicating the wall in Nehemiah chapter 12. I think the other one is a little bit less iconic to you and me. It's not one that plays as well with the flannel graph from Sunday school. It's not one that works as well for a painting on the wall. It's more subtle. It's more ceremonial and less dramatic, less violent, less obviously supernatural. And it is a scene. Oh, I'm trying to turn the page. I spilled. Okay, hang on. From Joshua chapter 8. And in this scene, the people of Israel, after accomplishing another pretty huge win, I mean, the Jericho win is probably the most famous in Joshua. Maybe the second is the one recorded in the beginning of Joshua chapter 8, which is the victory over Ai. Literally, that's not like artificial intelligence, just AI. That was the name of the town, Ai, capital A, lowercase I. So they win this victory, and that geographically positions them to carry out this ceremony that they were instructed to carry out by God through Moses back in Deuteronomy before they conquered. This is all going to make sense. Stick with me for a minute here. So big picture here. In Exodus, you get the initiation of the covenant, the deal between God and the descendants of Abraham, God's chosen people, and it all gets laid out. And then they go out in the desert and they stumble all over it. And they're worshiping a golden calf. They're unfaithful to God. It's like, oh my goodness. This has gone south so quickly. What the heck is going on? But there's a course correction as we get toward the end of the books written by Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And in Deuteronomy, there's a rededication to the covenant. There's a clarification of it. Moses walks everybody, including this new generation that's coming up, through it again to be like, this is really important. This is our thing. This is what we do. So literally just in Moses' lifetime, they take 2 runs at explaining God's law and the covenant to the people and calling them to commit themselves to it. In Deuteronomy 10 and on into 11, there's this whole call to the old people, the young people, and the part of Moses to say, love the Lord your God and keep his requirements and decrees and his laws and his commands always. Remember today that your children were not the ones who saw and experienced the discipline of the Lord your God, his majesty, his mighty hand, his outstretched arm, the signs he performed and the things he did in the heart of Egypt, both to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and to the whole country. So there's all this stuff at the beginning of Deuteronomy 11. That's what I was just reading you, the first couple verses there of Deuteronomy 11, about this needs to be remembered. You have to provide for, you have to plan for how to hand this thing down to future generations. And what Moses is saying is, like, build in mnemonic devices, build in things so that your kids and their kids and their kids will remember. There's so much language like that. Famously in verse 18 of Deuteronomy 11, fix these words of mine in your hearts and minds, tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates so that your days and the days of your children may be many in the land that the Lord swore to give your forefathers, as many as the days that the heavens are above the earth. If you carefully observe all these commands I am giving you to follow, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways and to hold fast to him, then the Lord will drive out all these nations before you, and you will dispossess nations larger and stronger than you. Every place where you set your foot will be yours. Your territory will extend. And so there's all of this language here about remembrance and honoring God and how this isn't just going to happen. you have to pass these things along in subtle ways and in big, obvious, symbolic ways. Well, we read a little further into Deuteronomy 11, and we get down to, where's it at? Verse 29, and this is one of those big symbolic ways that are prescribed by God and by Moses to remember all of these things generationally. When the Lord your God has brought you into the land you are entering to possess, you are to proclaim on Mount Gerizim the blessings, and on Mount Ebal the curses, so the two sides of the covenant that we've talked about a whole bunch over the course of this season. As you know, these mountains are across the Jordan, west of the road, toward the setting sun, near the great trees of Moreh, in the territory of those Canaanites living in the Arabah in the vicinity of Gilgal. You are about to cross the Jordan and enter to take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you. When you have taken it over and are living there, be sure that you obey all the decrees and laws I am setting before you today. Okay, remember, we're still talking about what Nehemiah is trying to evoke in how he put together this dedication of the wall ceremony, basically 1,000 years after the words I just read you from Deuteronomy were proclaimed by Moses. Well, fast forward a generation from Moses to the next generation, the conquering generation we talked about yesterday of Joshua. And in Joshua chapter 8, they finally did it. They conquered Ai. So now, because Ai is out of the picture, they have control of the region that they were supposed to go to and line up on the two mountains to proclaim the blessings and the curses, to do basically yet another, a third big grand covenant ceremony with the descendants of Abraham. And it was supposed to happen on these two mountains. Now Ai is defeated and they can pull it off. Joshua 8:30. This is immediately after the defeat of Ai. Then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. He built it according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses, as a reference right back to what we just read in Deuteronomy 11, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool had been used. On it they offered to the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. There in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua copied on the stones the law of Moses, which he had written. All Israel, aliens and citizens alike, pay real close attention to this part, with their elders, officials, and judges, were standing on both sides of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. This is where God lived at that time among them. There wasn't a temple yet, so he lived in that portable space. Now, in Nehemiah, the idea is he lives in that temple that's right there in the background of this whole rededication of the wall ceremony. So everybody's standing on both sides of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, facing those who carried it. The priests, who were Levites, half of the people stood in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had formerly commanded when he gave the instructions to bless the people of Israel. Afterward, Joshua read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curses, just as it is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and children and the aliens who lived among them. Are the alarm bells going off? Look, so much of Nehemiah is an echo of exactly that. What are we getting in Nehemiah? Another renewal of the covenant. Another proclamation of we are in on this thing. And in a way, we've kind of had two of these over the course of just the last few chapters. These ceremonies are all working together as one big giant mega ceremony that is hearkening back to all of this old dedication of the people to the covenant with God. Clearly, Nehemiah wants the people to get that that is what's happening. Now, that Mount Ebal, Mount Gerizim area, which is around Shechem, is this perfect natural amphitheater where you could line up on either side of that. And these two mountains, by the way, factor into a whole bunch of other really interesting stories in the Bible and church history. Some stuff happened around the time of Pontius Pilate that isn't in the Bible, but it's really interesting there. These are very important mountains, but in this scene, they're in that natural amphitheater, and they are, again, almost doing that call and response thing where everybody can see everybody else because of the natural contour, the topography of the land. So everybody can see everybody else, and everybody knows, like, we're all assenting to this. We all heard it. We were all there. It's very important. Well, now the walls of Jerusalem here in Nehemiah chapter 12 are sort of representative, I believe, of Ebal and Gerizim once again. We've got not a natural amphitheater, but a man-made amphitheater now, made possible by the building of these tall, stout walls. And you've got these musicians moving in opposite directions on two sides to frame the whole event. And effectively, they're engaging in call and response. You'll recall the text of Nehemiah 12, that the first of the two large choirs proceeded to the top of the wall to the right toward the dung gate. And then after that, the fountain gate, and they continued directly up to the steps of the city of David on the ascent to the wall, probably singing psalms of ascent. But then Nehemiah 12:38 says the second choir proceeded in the opposite direction, and Nehemiah followed them on top of the wall together with half the people, and they went around all of these walls and everything. And then the two choirs converge at verse 40. The two choirs that gave thanks then took their places in the house of God, and so did I, Nehemiah, together with half the officials. And then there's a list of names that we'll get to a little bit later on. The choirs sang under the direction of Jezariah, and on that day they offered great sacrifices, rejoicing because God had given them great joy. The women and children also rejoiced. The sound of rejoicing in Jerusalem could be heard far away. Now, next time around, we're going to come back to the whole sound of rejoicing. That also puts a bookend on something that's been lingering out there and not quite sitting right with us. Again, we're coming back to that. But for now, Nehemiah, you genius. You master of communication. You master of story. You master of symbolism. What a brilliant way to communicate to everybody in a way they can understand, in an image, in an iconic moment, that this isn't happening on an island. This rededication of the walls and rebuilding of the people is not some new religious movement or new thing. This is the continuation or the completion of the rebuilding process of a very old thing, and that all the miraculous work of God and the promises of God confirmed by those miraculous things, Nehemiah is communicating, that's all carried forward into what's going on right here. This is a brilliant way to spike the football after building these walls and hearken back to ancient images with deep meaning, hearkening back to times where people knew that God was present in the thing, where God broke the laws of time and space in ways that nobody could argue against. To say that he was involved in it, Nehemiah has found a wonderful way to connect back into those stories and to communicate to people that story is still going on right here. And what is happening right now is supernaturally ordained by God as well. I think this is a massively powerful moment, a massively underrated moment in terms of significance in the Old Testament. And look at this. Here we are 2,500-ish years later, and Nehemiah, across time, through the way he planned this event, has caused you and me, you just did it too, to go back through the old story and reconsider it anew for ourselves as well. That's very, very effective. Pretty cool. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.